I hope you're all enjoying this typical British weather day. It's nice and rainy outside, stark contrast from the nice sunshine we've been having. But without further ado, I will get into sharing my slides so you can hopefully all follow on. So, and apologies, I've shaved my beard. I don't look like that anymore. Just bring up the camera so you can see me at the same time. Do let me know if the slides are not big enough and I will disappear my video. Just to let you know that there may be time at the end of the session for some quick questions through the chat. There's approximately a 15-second delay between me speaking and you hearing me, so that might be why things seem a bit out of kilter. So without further ado, I'm Mehmet Hussein. I'm going to be speaking to you today about working from home and cloud comms, specifically around business continuity in 2020 and beyond. If 2 months ago somebody had told me that the vast majority of the white-collar workforce would be working from home, I probably wouldn't have believed them. And I'm sure most of you in this session wouldn't have believed it either. But it's happened, right? We're all here, we're experiencing it, we're living it. And it's caught most industries and most environments off guard. And we're going to explore what that means for the people working at home and for the industries that it's affected. So almost everybody here will be working from home. And what we're seeing is residential bandwidth is being hammered, right? It's being contended between your business applications, your Zoom, WebEx, Teams, whatever you're using for your collaboration. And there's more than likely loads of people sitting in the household, not able to go to school. Some people will be on furlough, not able to go to their jobs, and they'll be passing the time by watching Netflix and Sky and Disney Plus because we can't go anywhere and do anything. And this is causing contention on residential broadband circuits, and to some degree, it can impact your collaborative experiences. So what have we seen as a reaction in the industry? Well, early on, Netflix announced that they would be reducing the streaming quality across Europe. That has reduced the level of contention on residential broadband circuits. And on the collaboration side, we saw early on in the crisis that Teams and certain GSM networks went down for a period of time simply because of the amount of utilization that they were seeing. Since then, all parties have been working hard to bolster the backbones that carry these somewhat vital services. But it's not just the virtual world that's been impacted here. To interface with this virtual world, you will need certain items of hardware, right? You'll need webcams, headsets, conferencing hardware, whatever it is that you're using. So at the moment, I'm using a webcam. And these are running out of stock. And I can mention my own personal anecdote. I've been helping my sister try to get 3 kids homeschooled and get her husband setting up from working from home because their internal IT department where her husband works wasn't too savvy and they didn't have any working from home plan set up at all. That's been a challenge. Everything was out of stock. There were no items of technology for them to buy. There were no headsets, there were no webcams, even desks that they were looking for to set up a computer were out of stock. So this is a new challenge for physical supply chain and for people to get their heads around. Not to mention the manicness of having 3 kids at home, trying to be homeschooled whilst trying to work from home. So this slide is showing a survey and some data collected by the Cavell Group. It's specifically focusing on service providers and the package and the collaboration packages that they provide. And you can see what they've seen is a dramatic increase in collaboration tool demand. As a carrier, we, Voxbone, have seen a massive demand for capacity across the globe, specifically from conferencing providers and other carriers who are struggling to scale. This indicates to us, and should indicate to everybody else, that business spending that there is business spending on services that hadn't otherwise been budgeted for. This is a new consideration for our times, really. I've been asked, can I make the slides full screen? So I will disappear my video. So how we've spoken about the service providers, right? This is how their industry is being impacted. Let's take a step above that and look at the carriers. Carriers are just about coping. They are seeing a huge increase in demand across the board for telecom services. What this means is they're operating in loads of countries. Loads of people in loads of countries operating loads of services are demanding connectivity into countries for voice traffic. All of a sudden, this demand is outstripping the supply that they have available where they are legacy types of carriers. We're witnessing a fundamental shift in the way that carriers interface with the incumbent networks in certain countries, and that is a transition away from fixed line communication towards IP-based communication. What we're seeing on the carrier side is that carriers that rely on legacy communications, i.e. fixed line, are slow to adapt. These are the guys that are knocking on Voxbone's door and saying, hey, can you help us in these countries because we can't turn up our services quick enough. This is forcing tier one carriers to change the way that they operate. I'm being thanked for slides in full screen. You're most welcome. The ability for carriers to pivot and expand their capability in countries in times of demand is paramount to their success. So the decision that they're facing now is, do they decide that they've had the profit that they can get from their fixed line communication legacy infrastructure, and it's now time to reinvest in IP-based infrastructure, if they haven't done that already, which they should have done, or are they just going to bail out of the market in its entirety? So let's have a look at a specific country, and I'm going to talk about the UK because I'm British and most of us are in the UK. We're going to be saying goodbye to ISDN, and for those of you that don't know what ISDN is a telephony service tied to a physical cable, not necessarily analog. It's a digital subscriber line after all, but it is tied to a physical cable. These services in the UK are coming to an end. In the UK, you can no longer procure these services from this year going forward, and in 2025, ISDN and PSTN circuits, those are the analog lines going into your common building, will be discontinued entirely. This means that SIP migration should be paramount for all carriers, and especially for enterprises. They should be checking that their carriers are ready for this SIP pivot that is happening around the globe. So, for those of you that don't know what SIP is, SIP stands for Session Initiation Protocol, which doesn't mean much to many people. It's essentially a protocol that allows voice communications over any IP-based network. Certain countries are deciding to make this change sooner, and they're pushing their carriers to do this. Case in point, Germany. They've recently mandated that all carriers must use IP-based interconnects into their incumbent network. And this is affecting the way that carriers do business and will affect the level of coverage that carriers can offer to both enterprises and to service providers. So, how should you as an enterprise or a business view cloud communications? From our perspective, we've seen it go from a nice to have to a must have. Previously, it was something that people would have thought about investing in, but didn't really see the demand. Now, when we're in this disaster scenario, we're seeing that it's actually part of a DR plan to have your cloud communications fully agile. You should be making sure that whatever route you choose, whatever package you go for, it is fully geo-redundant so that your workforce can continue functioning wherever they are, much like we are now. Now, if your organization was already on a digital transformation path, then cloud communications should be shoehorned in there if it is not already in there. If you're not on any digital transformation path yet, you need to speed up. The world is changing and the way that we do business is changing. Your first step will likely be to go down the unified communications as a service route, UCaaS for short. This is essentially buying your services bundled from one supplier who gives you everything that you need in one neat module. So, but when making a move to the cloud, there's always the consideration about cost and capability. And in terms of communications, you need to be looking at a supplier that can scale with you. So if you're a large multinational organization, you need to be identifying a supplier that can service you in all the regions where you operate. Now, from a carrier perspective, this isn't a direct requirement. This is more going to be important when you're talking directly to your service provider, so your 8x8s or your Ring Centrals. You need to be certain that they can offer you services in all the locations where you operate. And if they can't, you need to ask them why. One of the movements that we're seeing in the industry that can solve this problem is bring your own carrier, whereby an organization that has already moved to the cloud has seen how easy it is and has decided that they want to have the most efficient product possible, spending the least possible money for the most possible capability, without having multiple routes to consume the same services. So they might choose to go for the person that can provide them with the best widget or application, but also partner with their carrier of choice in the locations where they operate, because the person who builds the widget or application doesn't necessarily have carrier relationships in those countries. Why is this even a thing? It's a thing because of regulations. In certain countries, there are regulations which govern how, who, and why certain telecom services are offered. And it doesn't necessarily always make financial sense for a service provider to offer services in those markets because the regulations might be so stringent. So if you partner with a carrier that operates in the markets where you want to consume, and a service provider that can provide you with the services that you want in the locations that you want to consume them, you're probably going to be onto a winner. We call this approach unbundling. You're taking the unified communications package that you would otherwise be buying from your single service provider and unbundling it, separating it. Much like the IT industry has transitioned away from one single thing as a service from one supplier to microservices, unknitting the web of IT. So some final thoughts on where this is going, and there will be a section, there will be a small amount of time for some questions by the chat, but please remember there's a 15-second delay. What we predict is the adoption for telecoms that we would have seen over the next 5 years. We are going to see that compressed into a period of the next 3 to 6 months. So what should you be doing right now? You should be assessing and evaluating your cloud, your communication strategy in general. It should include something to do with the cloud, because this is one of the only ways that you can ensure that your employees can stay communicating regardless of what happens in the wider world. We don't know how long we're going to be in this situation. We need to plan for the future. If you're unsure, speak to your experts. Unshamedly, I'm going to plug Voxbone here. We are experts in this field. If you want advice on what to do next and how to take your first steps, come and speak to us or any of the other industry experts in this event or anywhere else in the industry. Speak to the experts because they will guide you on the best things to do first. Then take your first small steps into the cloud communications world. When things have settled a bit, have a look at what's out there. Most people will be offering free trials. Sign up for them, have a look, see how they go together, see how they work, see if the experience is what you want. Don't jump at the first person that offers you a good price. Almost everybody offers free trials. Try them all out, choose the one that's best for you, and again, discuss this with your experts. Now, I didn't want to go too far into the technicalities of all of this, so I'm going to open the floor now to questions on the chat channel, but remember there's a 15-second delay. Alternatively, you are welcome to come to our booth, or you can email me directly, and my email address is on the screen now. So I'll give it 15 seconds to see if there's any questions coming through. Seems people are being a bit shy. In that case, if we don't have any questions, I will thank you all. Oh, we have a question. In what situation should an organization opt for an all-in-one solution versus an unbundled approach? Well, if you're taking your first steps into cloud communications, I can see questions flowing through now, so I'll keep this going a little bit longer. I'll keep this going until I'm kicked out, really. If you're in what situation should you be opting for an all-in-one versus an unbundled approach? You should be opting for an all-in-one solution when you're taking your first steps. I wouldn't suggest that it's sensible to dive into separating the communications stack unless you know what you're doing. It's not incredibly difficult, but it would serve you well if you took your first steps by consuming your bundled option. Now, in terms of financially, when does it make sense? When you're a large global organization with people all over the world, you can realize some real economies of scale by contracting with one single carrier and potentially consuming different application modules in the different locations where your businesses operate. We have another question. What do you think has more influence on working from home cloud comms? Cultural change forced by COVID or technology advances like 5G? So I like that question, actually. So I would have, if you asked me 2 months ago, I would have said technology advances will drive people towards working from home because it will become easier and easier to do. There was a big stigma around working from home before the coronavirus crisis hit, in that people were reticent about letting their workforce work from home, potentially because they were unsure about if they were actually going to do work, or whether the productivity would drop, or they were unsure about making the investment, whether it was sensible. I think now it's been proven that working from home is something that works, and we will see after the crisis has happened, after the crisis has elapsed, and we're all allowed to go about our daily lives again, we will see a marked increase in people who remain working from home and organizations who implement working from home policies who never had them before. So it looks like we've run dry on questions, which is perfectly fine. So I'd like to say thank you for coming to my rather short keynote, but I hope you found it informative.